Every year when the Christmas season arrives, there is one thing everyone remembers. Not the gifts, not the gatherings, but that strange and quiet warmth that comes from looking at a Christmas tree glowing softly in the middle of the house. Tiny lights twinkling in the dimness, little ornaments swaying gently, and somehow, no matter how busy life has been, everything feels just a little more peaceful. Dad had decorated that year's tree with real care and effort. And BUEM, standing there admiring it, set off a chain of events that no one in the house could possibly have seen coming. This is the story of one Christmas afternoon, a fallen tree, a bag full of hidden secrets, and most importantly, a father who didn't scold his children, but instead opened a bag of snacks and sat down to fix the tree. BUEM stood alone in front of the Christmas tree. Dad had decorated this tree the day before, meticulously, carefully, every strand of tinsel, every small bulb placed just so. The tree stood in the middle of the room, lush and full of color, the little lights twinkling like tiny stars that someone had brought down from the sky and set inside the house. BUEM studied the tree for a long time, head tilted slightly to one side, eyes moving from top to bottom, from the very tip down to the base, taking in every small detail that Dad had put effort into creating. And then, something rose up inside BUEM that is sometimes hard to put into words. That feeling when you see something beautiful and suddenly want the person who made it to know that you see it, that you value it. BUEM wanted to tell Dad that this tree was wonderful, that Dad had done such a good job, that looking at Mortfei it made everything feel warmer. But BUEM didn't quite know how to say that yet. Instead, BUEM stood there a little longer, thinking, and then noticed something, a small idea, a small thing that could be done. Whether it was the right way or not, BUEM decided to try. BUEM turned, ran down the staircase and called out, "Cutis." Downstairs, Cutis was living in his own personal paradise. He was stretched out full length on the sofa, in the most comfortable position imaginable. Legs extended, back sinking into the soft cushions, eyes fixed completely on the television screen in front of him. On the small table beside him, a plate of fruit had been prepared, each piece cut neatly, fresh and colorful and fragrant. Cutis was watching the show he'd been waiting for all week. It had reached the best part, the kind of part that, if interrupted, would leave you quietly mourning for the rest of the day. His eyes didn't leave the screen. His hand reached automatically for a piece of fruit, brought it to his mouth, while his gaze stayed locked on the television. The smooth, practiced movement of someone who had perfected the art of eating and watching simultaneously. The afternoon was quiet, the house was still. A light breeze moved past the window. For Cutis in this moment, this was the ideal state of happiness. Nothing to do, nowhere to be, just here with the fruit plate and a show that kept getting better. And then a voice called down from the staircase. "Cutis." Cutis furrowed his brow, eyes not moving from the screen. BUEM appeared at the bottom of the staircase, hurried, slightly breathless, with the look of someone who needed something handled right away. Cutis glanced over. The way BUEM had come running down, not walking but running, made Cutis sit up a little straighter, some small instinct stirring. "What's going on?" BUEM came close and said, "Cutis, can you turn off the Christmas tree lights for me?" Cutis looked at BUEM for a moment. That was it? Just turn off the lights? He didn't ask why, didn't question it. Cutis simply stood up, reached over and wrapped BUEM into his arms in that warm, familiar way he always did, holding him close for a moment, and together they walked toward the light switch. Cutis's hand reached up and found it, a small click, and the little glowing lights on the Christmas tree, twinkling and glittering just a second before, went dark. BUEM stood beside the tree, looking into the dimness where the lights had just been, with the expression of someone thinking about something they weren't quite ready to say aloud. Cutis didn't ask anything more. He just gave BUEM one quiet look, the kind that said, "You okay?" Then turned back to the staircase, headed downstairs, and returned to the show and the fruit plate waiting for him. A quiet exhale. Good, everything was fine, the show was still there. BUEM stayed alone with the Christmas tree. The room was quieter now, a little darker without the lights. The tree looked different without its glow, but still beautiful in its own way. BUEM stood looking at Mortfiat for a moment, then walked slowly around it, then looked up toward the top. And curiosity, that thing no child in the world can ever fully control, began to win. BUEM reached out and touched one of the branches, then another. The small decorative ornaments hung there, turning gently when disturbed, catching what little light filtered into the room. BUEM looked up at the top of the tree, just slightly above reach, but if you climbed a little. No one knows exactly when BUEM made that decision, but in the very next moment, BUEM had started to climb. A Christmas tree is not designed to hold any weight. It stands because of a delicate balance, because it has been placed carefully, because no one has grabbed it the way BUEM was grabbing it now. And then, a sound. Not a small sound. The sound of an entire Christmas tree losing its balance, dragging everything hanging on it. Lights, tinsel, every small ornament. Down with it, pieces knocking against each other, rolling out across the floor in every direction. BUEM stood in the middle of it all, looking around. Complete silence. Downstairs, Cutis was still watching the show. It had reached the final stretch. The part Cutis had been waiting for since the beginning, the ending. He'd tried to guess a dozen different ways in his head. The television was loud enough to muffle everything else. The fruit plate was nearly empty. Cutis was in a state of complete and total contentment. The show ended. Cutis lay still for a little while longer, letting the feeling of the ending settle. That particular quiet satisfaction that comes when a good story finishes exactly the way you hoped it would. Then he stood up, stretched, and climbed the stairs. Cutis stepped up onto the last stair and stopped. Before him was a scene he had never imagined seeing when he came up here. The Christmas tree. The tree Dad had spent so much time decorating the day before. The tree with the twinkling lights and shimmering tinsel was leaning sideways, tilted and precarious. Ornaments were scattered across the floor. The light string was tangled. Tinsel spread out in every direction. And BUEM, standing in the middle of all of it, looking at Cutis ve capite, hat wide round eyes, and the expression of someone who very much wanted to be forgiven. Cutis said nothing for one full second. Then, in his mind, like a film playing at high speed, came the image of Dad returning from the market, stepping through the door and seeing this. What would Dad say? What would Dad's face look like? The tree that Dad had spent an entire evening decorating, now lying scattered across the floor. Cutis' heart beat faster, and he started moving. First step, buy time. Cutis moved quickly around the room, closing every door. This room's door, the door connecting to the next room, each one shutting away another layer between this disaster and the rest of the house. If Dad came home and didn't see it immediately, there might be a little more time. Just a little. But to Cutis right now, even a few extra minutes were as valuable as gold. Cutis stood in the middle of the room, looked around, and began thinking fast. He couldn't fix the tree right now, not enough time, and no idea how to rehang everything the way Dad had done it. He couldn't leave it like this. Dad would see it the moment he walked in. So what was left? Cutis looked downstairs, ran down, searched for a moment, and found a large plastic bag. He brought it upstairs and started picking things up. Each ornament, each strand of tinsel. Every small decoration that had fallen to the floor, Cutis picked them up one by one, dropped them into the bag, moving quickly but carefully, because even in his panic, he knew that nothing else could be allowed to break. BUEM stood watching, wanting to help but not knowing how. Just standing there, eyes following Cutis' every movement, almost certainly feeling very sorry inside. Cutis did to scold BUEM, there was no time for that. And honestly, Cutis understood. BUEM had only been curious, had only wanted to explore, and sometimes, curiosity leads to consequences that nobody wanted. The decorations were all gathered into the bag. Cutis tied it shut, looked around once more. The floor still had tinsel on it. Tiny scattered fragments caught the light from the room. Cutis grabbed the broom and started sweeping. He swept carefully, corner by corner. BUEM stood to one side, completely quiet, not daring to say anything because he knew he was the cause of all of this. Cutis swept and swept, the broom moving steadily across the wooden floor, gathering up everything that remained. The room gradually looked cleaner. But one large problem remained. The Christmas tree, still standing at an awkward tilt in the middle of the room, completely impossible to explain away. And just as Cutis was wrestling what to do about the tree, from outside came a familiar sound. The sound of Dad's vehicle. Dad was home. Cutis froze for 1 second. Then, with no time left to think further, he made the boldest decision of the entire afternoon. Hide the tree. No one could honestly say this was the best idea Cutis had ever had. But in that moment, with the sound of Dad's footsteps drawing closer, it was the only idea Cutis had. Cutis grabbed the Christmas tree, dragged it toward the large cabinet in the corner of the room, looked at the gap beneath it, looked at the tree, looked back at the gap, and began trying to push the tree underneath. Branches rustling and scraping, a few stubborn ones refusing to disappear, no matter how hard Cutis pushed. Done, more or less. If you didn't look directly, you would see it. Cutis pulled BUEM over. The two of them looked at each other, and without a word, both squeezed into the corner beside the cabinet and sat down tucked against the spot where the tree was hidden. Bodies pressed out of sight behind the furniture, quiet, barely breathing. The sound of the front door opening downstairs. Footsteps coming inside. Dad's voice calling, "Cutis?" The two of them sat completely still in their dark corner, pressed together, hearts beating hard. Cutis squeezed his eyes shut, as though if he couldn't see Dad wouldn't be able to see him either. Footsteps on the staircase, coming closer, closer still. Dad stepped into the room, looked around. The room was empty, the Christmas tree nowhere to be seen. Dad's eyes moved to the large cabinet in the corner, and he spotted it immediately, several branches of the tree poking out from underneath, green and unmistakable. Dad stopped, looked at the gap under the cabinet once more, then looked to the side, at the corner where two small figures were huddled, doing their very best to become part of the wall. Dad had found them. Cutis and BUEM looked up, their eyes identical in that moment, wide, slightly trembling, full of fragile hope that somehow things would be okay. A short silence. Then Cutis spoke first. He told the story. No more deflecting, no more hiding. BUEM had climbed the tree. It had fallen. The decorations had scattered everywhere. He had tried to gather them up, tried to sweep, tried to hide the tree because he was afraid Dad would come home and be upset. BUEM sat beside him, listening, then added his own part. Voice quieter but clear. It was his fault. He was the one who climbed. Cutis hadn't done anything wrong. The two of them took turns claiming the mistake, each one trying to pull the weight of responsibility toward themselves, as though competing to protect the other. Dad stood and listened to all of it, didn't interrupt, didn't frown, just listened. When both of them had finished, the room went quiet. Cutis and BUEM looked at Dad and waited. This was the moment both of them had been dreading since the moment the tree fell, the moment when Dad would say something. Dad looked at the two of them for a moment, then breathed out slowly. No scolding. Not a single word of reproach. Dad just said, his voice calm and warm, "Dad will make the tree again. It's okay." And then Dad did something neither Cutis nor BUEM had expected. He opened the bag he'd brought back from the market and took out a packet of snacks. He sat down beside them both, opened the packet, and handed one to each of them. "Go ahead and eat. Dad will fix the tree." And Dad, after a full day at the market, after discovering that the tree he had decorated had such care was stuffed under a cabinet, sat down, pulled the tree back out, took the ornaments from the bag, and slowly began again from the beginning. Not a word of complaint, not a single heavy sigh. Just Dad putting the Christmas tree back together, while his two children sat eating snacks and watching. Cutis and BUEM sat side by side on the sofa. In front of them, the television was showing something, but neither of them was really watching. Their eyes kept drifting to where Dad was sitting and working, watching his hands carefully re-hanging each ornament onto the tree. The snacks were good, crispy, and just the right sweetness. Cutis took a bite, chewed, and looked over at BUEM. BUEM was eating too, his face far more relaxed than it had been when the two of them were huddled in the corner of the cabinet. They looked at each other, then both looked back at Dad. Dad was rehanging the small lights, just as meticulous and patient as the day before, as though nothing had happened at all. Each ornament placed in its right position, each strand of tinsel arranged carefully, the tree slowly coming back to life, glowing and warm, beautiful in the way that only things made and remade with love can be beautiful. The afternoon moved on quietly. The television murmured softly, the gentle sound of the snack wrapper and the sound of Dad at his work, unhurried, steady, without complaint. Cutis leaned back into the sofa and closed his eyes for just a moment. What he felt right now, it was to the relief of having escaped a scolding. It was something deeper, something warmer, the feeling of being forgiven without ever having had to beg for it.